The cashier's hand trembled, her fingers barely able to hold onto the edge of the counter. She had never been in a situation like this before, and the fear was palpable. Her eyes darted between the note and the man in the worn baseball cap, trying to gauge his intentions. Was he serious? Would he really hurt her if she didn't comply?
"Empty the register," it read. "No die packs, no funny business." The words were scrawled hastily, but the message was clear and terrifying.
His voice was a low growl, barely above a whisper, yet it carried a weight that made her knees weak. She could feel the menace in his tone, the promise of violence if she didn't act quickly.
"Just do it." His words were simple, but the threat behind them was unmistakable.
The McDonald's on Sunset Boulevard was quiet, eerily so. The usual lunchtime rush was over, and the place had an almost ghostly feel to it. The usual lunchtime rush over. This was his time, the perfect moment for someone like him to strike, when the place was nearly deserted. Daniel Rivera, the man who would become a legend, was about to pull off his first heist. He had planned this for weeks, studying the routines, the shifts, and the security measures. This was his moment, and he was ready to seize it. The adrenaline coursed through his veins as he took a deep breath, steeling himself for what was to come. This was just the beginning of a series of events that would make him infamous. But for now, all that mattered was the note and the terrified cashier in front of him. The early 90s were a time of struggle. The streets were filled with people trying to make ends meet, their faces etched with worry and uncertainty. The recession had gripped America, and Daniel Rivera felt its icy fingers tighten around his life. Every day was a battle to survive, a fight against the relentless tide of economic despair. Jobs were scarce, opportunities scarcer. Factories that once buzzed with activity now stood silent, their gates locked and their workers left to fend for themselves. Eviction notices piled up on his door, each one a hammer blow to his dignity. The fear of losing his home loomed large, a constant shadow over his every waking moment. He found himself standing in line at food banks, the shame burning in his gut, the once proud man now humbled, forced to rely on the kindness of strangers to feed his family.
He wasn't a bad man, just a desperate one. Desperation had driven him to the edge, making him question his worth and his place in the world. He clung to hope, even as it seemed to slip through his fingers, believing that one day, things would get better.
The money from that first robbery tasted sweeter than any Big Mac ever could. It was the culmination of weeks of planning, sleepless nights, and the constant fear of getting caught. The adrenaline rush was unlike anything he had ever experienced before. It was a small haul, barely enough to cover his rent, but to Daniel it represented so much more. It was a symbol of his newfound independence, a break from the chains that had held him down for so long. But it was a start, a way out. Each step he took away from that scene felt lighter, as if the weight of the world was slowly lifting off his shoulders. The streets, once filled with shadows and threats, now seemed to whisper promises of a brighter future. The fear that had gnawed at him was replaced by a strange exhilaration. The rain that night felt like a baptism, washing away his past and giving him a fresh start. He could feel the pulse of the city, and for the first time it felt like it was beating in sync with his own heart.
He had stared down his demons, faced the darkest parts of himself, and emerged victorious. The mirror reflected not just his face, but the determination that now burned within him, and come out on top. The alleyways that once seemed menacing now felt like pathways to his destiny. Each step echoed with newfound confidence. Daniel Rivera had found his calling, however twisted it may seem. The world outside that window was vast and full of opportunities, and he was ready to seize them, one heist at a time.
Word spread like wildfire. Soon, Daniel wasn't alone. He became a mentor to others desperate for a taste of the forbidden. His methods were meticulous, planned with military precision.
He knew the layout of every McDonald's, the shift changes, the security loopholes. He even wrote a handbook, a twisted testament to his dedication.